If you agree that sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest stories, make sure to like and subscribe, because what you're about to hear will change how you look at ordinary faces forever. They said she was just the music teacher. Soft voice, soft hands, soft heart. The kind who smiled too much and spoke too little, who carried herself with the calm rhythm of a melody no one else could hear. At Brookfield Middle School, Miss Clara Reed was known for her perfect posture, her immaculate lesson plans, and the way her students always seemed to stand a little straighter in her presence. She wasn't strict exactly, just precise. When she raised her baton, the room obeyed. When she said again, no one groaned. There was something in her tone that made even the most restless children fall into line. Most thought it was discipline. Some whispered it was fear. But they were wrong. It was memory. Every morning, she arrived 15 minutes before the first bell, the faint scent of coffee trailing behind her as she unlocked the music room. The floor was always spotless, the chairs aligned, the instruments tuned. On her desk sat a small brass compass with no needle, polished daily, though no one ever noticed it missing direction. She wore the same delicate silver watch each day, its glass cracked at the corner, frozen at 2:47. Sentimental, the janitor once said. She just smiled. Something like that. It was early November when the first whispers began. Veterans Week. The halls were decorated in red, white, and blue construction paper. The students rehearsed patriotic songs under fluorescent lights that hummed like tired insects. The principal, Mr. Harrington, had asked all staff to bring a personal touch to the assembly. Some shared family stories. Others brought old photographs. When he asked Clara if she had any connections to the service, she paused long enough for it to feel awkward. Then she said softly, "Once, I did some coordination work overseas. Long ago." He nodded absently, already moving on. To him, she was a polite teacher with a touch of nostalgia. Nothing more. That afternoon, while the rest of the school buzzed with rehearsals, Clara stayed late, seated at the piano, her fingers brushing the keys in slow, deliberate chords. The melody wasn't one her students knew. It wasn't written on any sheet in the room. It was a pattern of rising notes, clipped and precise, more code than song. If anyone had been listening closely, they might have recognized the rhythm. Short, short, long. A signal. The janitor, old Mr. Watts, lingered by the doorway, sweeping quietly. "That's a sad one," he said after a while. "Something from your childhood." Clara smiled faintly. "Something from a night sky," she murmured, "when I still thought the stars could hear me." He didn't understand, but he nodded kindly and went back to sweeping. She watched him go, her eyes flicking to the window, where rain streaked against the glass like tracer fire fading into darkness. The next morning, the new substitute PE coach, Mr. Landers, stopped by her room. "Heard you're the perfectionist around here," he said with a grin, watching her line up the music stands. "I swear, you run this place like boot camp." The students laughed. Clara glanced up, that same polite half-smile crossing her face. "Discipline," she said softly, "is how harmony learns to breathe." The coach rolled his eyes. "Guess I'll try that when my 8th graders throw dodgeballs at my head." More laughter. She joined in gently, but her eyes drifted toward the clock, and for the briefest moment, her hand brushed her left wrist, the one with the thin scar that vanished beneath her sleeve. That night, she went home to her small, plant-filled apartment on the edge of town. Her neighbors called her the quiet one, the kind who never complained about noise or parking or the world in general. Inside her apartment, there was no TV, just shelves of records, classical, orchestral, and one old box of radio tapes labeled archive. On the kitchen counter sat a folded newspaper clipping yellowed with age. "Rescue operation fails. Team Eagle 9 presumed lost." A younger version of her stared out from the photograph in uniform, her eyes sharper, her hair tied back under a helmet. She turned the paper face down before pouring herself tea. The next day brought drizzle and gray skies, the kind that make the air taste like nostalgia. The students arrived sleepy, their chatter bouncing off the walls. Clara moved among them like wind through reeds, quiet, constant, invisible. "Eyes on me," she said softly, tapping her baton against the stand. The room hushed instantly. Now again, for measure 12. Her voice held no edge, yet every student straightened, every hand obeyed. Principal Harrington, standing by the door, whispered to a colleague, "How does she do that?" The colleague shrugged. Guess music people just have control. They didn't see the slight tremor in Clara's hand as she lowered the baton. By midweek, the Veterans Day Assembly was the only topic of conversation. Rumor had it a real Army general was coming to speak, General Harlan Briggs, the hero of several classified rescue missions. The students buzzed with excitement. Even the teachers were intrigued. Maybe he'll bring medals, someone joked. Maybe he'll fall asleep during the choir, another added. Clara only listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When asked if she was nervous about performing in front of a general, she simply said, "Music is never nervous. It just waits to be played." That evening, she lingered alone in the classroom long after dark. The rain had stopped, and the flag outside the window hung limp and heavy. She turned off the lights, leaving only the piano lamp glowing, and opened the small brass compass again. Inside, instead of a needle, was a photo, blurred, faded, showing 6 figures in desert gear beside a helicopter. The center figure wore the same silver watch she wore now. Her fingers traced the image. "Eagle 9, she whispered, almost too softly to hear. Still flying. For 7 years, she had taught quietly, anonymously, content to let the world forget the name that once followed hers. In every note she played, in every rhythm she drilled into her students' small, eager hearts, she hid fragments of the discipline that had once kept her alive. But some echoes can't stay buried. They hum beneath the surface, waiting for one familiar voice to call them back to life. On the morning of the assembly, she arrived before dawn. The gym smelled of varnished floors and paper flags. She arranged the chairs for the band, checked the microphones, and pinned a small red poppy to her jacket. It was the only sign of sentimentality she ever allowed herself. As the sun lifted, faint light filtered through the high windows, scattering across the polished piano lid. She touched it gently, like greeting an old friend. "One more performance," she murmured. In the hallway, the distant sound of footsteps echoed, the principal giving a tour to the visiting dignitaries, their voices polite and formal. Clara didn't look up until she heard the name, General Briggs. Her hand froze midair. For a moment, the air felt thinner. She exhaled slowly, adjusting her collar. Just another guest, she told herself. But somewhere deep inside, the years began to stir. The years of static-filled radios, coded transmissions, and nights when music was used not for beauty, but for survival. They thought she was a music teacher, and she was. But before the classrooms and the choir concerts, before the neat rows of brass instruments and color-coded lesson plans, Clara Reed had been something else entirely. Something the world believed had vanished into the dark. And tomorrow morning, when the general finally saw her again, the music would stop, because sometimes the quiet ones are just waiting for someone to remember the song. The day of the assembly began like any other, at least for everyone except her. The corridors buzzed with laughter and nervous energy, paper flags rustled in hallway drafts, and teachers hurried about, adjusting microphones and straightening chairs. In the gym, sunlight filtered through the high windows, falling across the stage where rows of students sat with shiny instruments resting nervously in their laps. The scent of floor polish and brass oil filled the air. Miss Clara Reed stood at the edge of the stage, clipboard in hand, her calm presence cutting through the chaos. "Deep breaths," she said softly to her choir. "Remember, don't sing to the crowd. Sing to the meaning." The students nodded, steadying themselves under her gaze. It was the same quiet control she carried every day, gentle, unyielding, and strangely commanding. From the bleachers, Principal Harrington adjusted his tie, smiling nervously as the guests began to arrive. At the back of the gym, a murmur rippled through the crowd. The guest speaker, General Harlan Briggs, had entered. His uniform was immaculate, his posture rigid with years of habit. Silver stars glinted on his shoulders. Teachers whispered, impressed. Students craned their necks for a better view. Clara didn't look up right away. She focused on her students, on the tuning of a trumpet that had slipped a half note off. But when the general moved closer to the stage, she felt it, a ripple in the air, a pulse of something old. She raised her head just as his eyes swept across the room. Their gazes met. The general stopped mid-stride. The chatter around him died instantly. For a moment, he just stared, his brow furrowing, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. The clipboard in Clara's hands trembled slightly before she set it down on the piano. A silence spread through the gym like a slow-moving wave. "Is everything all right, sir?" Principal Harrington asked nervously, stepping forward. The general didn't answer. He took a few steps closer to the stage, his voice low, almost breaking. "It can't be," he muttered. Then, louder this time, trembling with emotion. Eagle 9, you're alive. The words struck the air like a thunderclap. The students froze. Teachers exchanged baffled glances. The entire gym seemed to inhale at once, waiting for her reaction. Clara's eyes didn't waver. For a long, waited moment, she stood completely still. Then, slowly, she straightened her posture, shoulders back, chin lifted, the way a soldier stands before a superior. Her voice came quiet but steady. "I prefer Clara now, sir." A stunned silence followed. Principal Harrington blinked, unsure what to say. I'm sorry, I don't think I understand." But the general wasn't listening to him. His hands shook as he removed his hat, disbelief and awe written across his face. "They told us you were gone," he said softly. "That no one from Eagle 9 made it out of Emberlight." His words echoed faintly in the vast space, carrying names and memories no one else in that room could understand. The students stared, wide-eyed. One of the choir girls whispered, "Miss Reed," but her voice trailed off, afraid to interrupt whatever was unfolding. Clara exhaled slowly. "The reports were not wrong," she said. Her tone was calm, but every syllable carried the weight of years buried in silence. "Part of us didn't make it out." The general took another step forward, his voice now thick with emotion. "You led the extraction team," he said. "You pulled 12 of us out from the ridge under blackout. I saw your chopper take fire." Clara's eyes flickered. For a moment, the mask slipped, just a fraction, and behind it lay grief, exhaustion, and a strength so fierce it could silence an entire crowd. "I stayed until the last signal went out," she said. "After that, I wasn't sure anyone remembered." The general's jaw tightened. "Remembered?" he said incredulously. "You saved lives. You saved mine." He turned toward the stunned audience, his voice rising. "This woman, this teacher, was the commander of Operation Emberlight, the most impossible rescue we ever pulled off. She didn't just survive, she brought her entire team home." Gasps rippled through the gym. A few students dropped their sheet music. Someone whispered, "Commander," but no one dared laugh. No one moved. The air felt sacred, charged with something they didn't have words for. Clara lowered her gaze, almost embarrassed. "That was a long time ago," she murmured. "Different life." The general shook his head. "No, ma'am. Different chapter, same courage." The room had gone completely still now. Even the smallest children understood that something extraordinary had just happened, that their quiet, gentle music teacher had been hiding an entire world behind her silence. Clara looked out across the sea of faces, her students, her colleagues, the people who had known her only through her patience and her piano. For a brief moment, she looked as though she might speak, might explain everything. But then she simply smiled, the kind of smile that says some stories don't need to be told out loud. Behind her, one of the students began to softly play the opening notes of the national anthem on the piano, uncertain, hesitant. Clara turned, gently placed her hand over the keys, and continued where the child had stopped. The melody filled the gym, slow, haunting, powerful. As she played, the general came to attention, his hand over his heart, his eyes locked on her. For the first time in years, she let the music carry her back, to dust and radio static, to coded transmissions sent through Morse-like rhythms, to the night she had last been known as Eagle 9. And when the final note faded, no one clapped. They couldn't. The silence that followed wasn't emptiness, it was reverence. Miss Clara Reed, the quiet music teacher, had just reminded an entire room that some songs aren't meant for applause. They're meant for remembrance. When the final note of the anthem faded, the silence that followed felt alive. No coughs, no shuffling of feet, no nervous whispers, just the collective stillness of hundreds of people trying to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The fluorescent lights above seemed to dim, or maybe it was just that the room itself had drawn a breath and forgotten to let it go. General Briggs stood motionless beside the piano, his cap pressed to his chest, his eyes never leaving Clara. The once commanding edge in his voice was gone. What remained was something softer, reverent. "You didn't just save soldiers," he said at last, his voice echoing faintly through the gym. "You saved what was left of us." Clara sat still for a moment, her hands resting on the piano keys. "I only did my duty," she murmured. "It was my post." He shook his head. "No, ma'am. You did what most of us couldn't." He turned then, facing the students and teachers whose eyes were still wide with disbelief. "You all should know who stands before you. This woman, Commander Clara Reed, led one of the most classified extraction missions during Operation Emberlight. When communications were cut, when every man was ordered to retreat, she stayed. She stayed until every one of us crossed the border alive." The crowd seemed to breathe in unison. A few of the students who had been sitting with slouched shoulders now stood upright. Even the chatter-prone 8th graders in the back lowered their eyes. Principal Harrington, speechless, removed his glasses and wiped them with trembling hands. Clara rose slowly from the piano bench, her expression caught between discomfort and quiet pride. "That's enough," she said softly. "Those days are over." The general's reply came with the gentleness of someone who'd lost too many friends to ever argue. "Maybe, but courage like that doesn't retire. It just changes its uniform." The line lingered. Then, without needing instruction, the students began to stand. One by one, like a wave moving through the room, they rose from their seats until every child, every teacher, every custodian in the gym stood in silence. Some placed their hands over their hearts. Others simply bowed their heads. No one clapped. No one dared to. Clara's eyes glistened, but she blinked back the tears before they could fall. She looked at her students, the same kids she had scolded gently for missed notes and late arrivals, and saw something different in them now. Respect, yes, but also understanding. They were seeing her, truly, for the first time. The general reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished insignia, its metal dulled with years, but still bearing the faint engraving of a winged number 9. He placed it gently on the piano beside her. "I kept this," he said quietly. "Found it near the crash site after we got out. I thought it was all that was left of you." Clara stared at it for a long time, her breath catching. The insignia looked impossibly small against the smooth black surface of the piano. "You should have kept it," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "It was never mine to keep." A low murmur rippled through the audience. Not from confusion, but awe. A few students were crying softly now. Even Mr. Landers, the new coach who had once joked about her being too strict, stood with his jaw set, his face pale. The weight of what he had said days earlier pressed against him like a stone. Clara turned back to the piano and placed her hand on the insignia. For a moment, the years seemed to collapse in on themselves. The battlefield, the music room, the faces of soldiers and children blurring together into one continuous rhythm of service and silence. Then she closed her fingers around it and held it to her chest. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for remembering." The general gave a small, respectful nod. Always. When the crowd finally began to move, it wasn't with noise or chaos, but with reverence. Teachers guided their students out in hushed lines. Principal Harrington lingered by the door, his eyes misted. Even the smallest children walked quietly, as though leaving a sacred place. When the gym was empty, Clara remained behind. The piano sat bathed in soft sunlight streaming through the high windows. She traced the edges of the insignia once more, then placed it on the corner of the instrument, where the light caught it just so. The metal gleamed faintly, like something alive again. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. For the first time in years, she felt no need to hide, no urge to shrink into quiet corners. She had lived 2 lives, one of war, one of peace. And now, finally, they could coexist in the same heartbeat. From outside came the faint sound of children laughing, the sound of life moving forward. Clara smiled, her reflection flickering softly in the polished piano lid. "Still flying," she whispered. And somewhere, perhaps in the rustle of the flag outside, perhaps in the memory of those who once called her Eagle 9, the echo of her promise answered back.